It was one of those crisp, early autumn mornings where the air carried just enough chill to make you appreciate the warmth of a good cup of coffee. I was standing on my porch, savoring the first sip of my dark roast, the steam curling up into the cool September breeze. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional chirp of a sparrow or the distant hum of a lawnmower. My house, a modest two-story with a neatly trimmed lawn, sat at the corner of Elmwood Drive, giving me a prime view of the street and the comings and goings of our little suburban enclave. I'd always liked this time of day, before the school buses rolled through, before the dog walkers and joggers started their rounds. It was peaceful, predictable, the kind of morning that made you feel like the world was still in order. But that morning, something was off. I couldn't quite place it at first. Maybe it was the way the light hit the hedge that bordered my driveway, casting jagged shadows across the pavement. Or maybe it was the faint, nagging sound that crept into my awareness, barely audible over the rustle of leaves. It wasn't a car engine or a barking dog. It wasn't even the usual clatter of Mr. Thompson's garbage cans being dragged to the curb. It was something else, something wrong. A hiss, low and insidious, like air escaping from a tire, but sharper, more deliberate. It wasn't the kind of hiss you associate with a snake slithering through the grass, nor was it the mechanical sputter of a cappuccino machine about to give up the ghost. No, this was different. It was the kind of sound that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, the kind that told you something was happening, something you weren't going to like. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing, careful not to spill, and strained my ears to pinpoint the source. The hiss was coming from the direction of the driveway, just beyond the hedge that separated my property from the communal sidewalk. I'd planted that hedge myself 3 years ago, a row of dense, emerald green arborvitae that gave me just enough privacy without blocking the view entirely. It was my buffer, my little slice of solitude in a neighborhood where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. But now, that hedge was hiding something, and the hiss was growing louder, more urgent, like a warning I couldn't ignore. I stepped off the porch, my sneakers crunching against the gravel path that led to the driveway. The morning sun was low, painting the asphalt in shades of gold and shadow, and I squinted as I rounded the corner of the hedge. That's when I saw her, Karen. There she was, in all her floral blouse glory, crouched down like a gardener tending to prized roses. Except she wasn't gardening. She wasn't anywhere near a flower bed. She was hunched over a gas line, a gleaming metal pipe that ran parallel to the sidewalk, clearly marked with bright yellow caution tape and a rectangular tag that screamed in bold red letters, "Emergency feed. Do not touch." The tape fluttered slightly in the breeze, as if trying to wave her off, but Karen wasn't paying attention. She never did. Karen was the kind of neighbor who made you question why you ever thought moving to the suburbs was a good idea. She wasn't just nosy, she was a one-woman surveillance state. If your grass was half an inch too long, she'd leave a passive-aggressive note taped to your mailbox. If your Christmas lights stayed up past January 1st, she'd call an emergency HOA meeting to discuss community standards. She had a knack for turning minor infractions into federal cases, and she wielded her position as head of the neighborhood beautification committee like a scepter. To Karen, appearances were everything. A crooked mailbox was a personal affront, a weed in a lawn was a war crime, and don't even get her started on unapproved paint colors. She'd once tried to fine the Hendersons for painting their front door navy blue instead of the HOA-approved slate gray. Navy blue, she'd argued, was disruptive to the aesthetic cohesion of the block. The Hendersons repainted, but not before telling her exactly where she could shove her color chart. And now, here she was, bent over a critical piece of infrastructure, her face set in that familiar mask of self-righteous determination. In her hands was a pair of oversized landscaping shears, the kind you'd use to trim hedges or cut through thick branches. Except she wasn't trimming hedges. She was hacking away at the gas line, the blades glinting in the morning light with every snip. The pipe was no match for her fervor. It was already dented, a thin gash visible where the metal had started to give way. The hiss was coming from that gash, a high-pitched wail of escaping gas that grew louder with every cut. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just Karen being Karen. This was dangerous. Catastrophically dangerous. Karen, I shouted, my voice cutting through the quiet morning like a gunshot. I took a step forward, my hands instinctively raised as if I could stop her with sheer willpower. What the hell are you doing? She didn't even flinch. That was the thing about Karen, she was immune to surprise, immune to shame. She straightened up, slowly, deliberately, like a queen rising from her throne. Her floral blouse, a garish mix of pink peonies and green vines, billowed slightly as she turned to face me. Her hair, a meticulously styled bob, didn't move an inch, held in place by what I could only assume was an industrial-grade hairspray. She fixed me with a look that was equal parts condescension and triumph, her lips curling into the most infuriating smile I'd ever seen. It was the smile of someone who believed they were doing the world a favor, the smile of someone who thought they were untouchable. "Oh, good morning," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine politeness. "I'm just taking care of a little eyesore. This ugly pipe was lowering the property value." "You're welcome." I stood there, dumbfounded, my mouth half open as I tried to process the absurdity of what she'd just said. Lowering the property value? This wasn't some rusted mailbox or a peeling picket fence. This was a high-pressure natural gas pipeline, the kind that fed into the backup generator that powered half the neighborhood during outages. We were heading into storm season, the time of year when power lines went down, trees fell, and entire blocks could be left in the dark for days. That generator wasn't just a luxury, it was a lifeline. It had been installed after a brutal 3-day blackout 2 years ago when the neighborhood had been plunged into chaos. People had lost food, businesses had shut down, and several elderly residents had been left without heat or medical equipment. One family, the Carters, had a homebound child who relied on a medical ventilator. Without that generator, they'd have been in serious trouble. And now here was Karen, snipping through the very thing that kept us safe, all because she thought it looked ugly. "Karen, stop." I yelled again, my voice sharper now, edged with panic. I took another step toward her, my hands still raised. "That's the main gas line. You're going to blow us all up." She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes, like I was some hysterical child overreacting to a spilled juice box. "Oh, please," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Men always make such a fuss. It's just a pipe. If it was so important, they wouldn't have left it out here looking like this. It's an embarrassment to the neighborhood." I could feel my blood pressure spiking, a dull throb starting at the base of my skull. This wasn't just ignorance. This was weaponized arrogance, the kind that didn't just endanger herself, but everyone around her. I glanced at the pipe again, the gash now visibly wider, the hiss growing into a menacing whistle. The air was starting to carry the faint, acrid smell of gas, and my heart pounded in my chest. I had to do something, and fast, but Karen was still standing there, shears in hand, looking at me like I was the one ruining her morning. "Karen, listen to me," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, though every instinct in me wanted to scream. "That pipe feeds the emergency generator. It's not just for looks, it's critical infrastructure. People depend on it. You need to step away right now." She tilted her head, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second, like she was actually considering what I'd said. But then she doubled down, because of course she did. "Critical infrastructure," she scoffed, her tone mocking. "If it's so critical, why isn't it buried? Why isn't it painted to match the sidewalk? This is a residential area, not an industrial park. I'm doing the neighborhood a favor by cleaning this up." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Cleaning this up? She was treating a gas line like it was an overgrown shrub, something she could just prune into submission. I took another step closer, careful not to get too close to the pipe, my mind racing. I wasn't an engineer, but I'd helped consult on the generator project 2 years ago, back when the HOA had scrambled to secure funding after the blackout. I knew enough to understand that a high-pressure gas line wasn't something you messed with. One wrong move, one spark, and we could be looking at a fireball that would take out half the block. And Karen, with her landscaping shears and her HOA handbook, was playing Russian roulette with all our lives. "Karen, I'm not joking," I said, my voice low and firm. "You're going to cause a gas leak. People could die. You need to stop right now and back away." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that made my skin crawl. "Die," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Don't be so dramatic. I've been beautifying this neighborhood for years, and no one's died yet. You should be thanking me for taking initiative." Thanking her? I wanted to shake her, to grab those shears and throw them into the next county. But I knew that wouldn't help. Karen wasn't the type to back down from a confrontation. She thrived on it. I'd seen her go toe-to-toe with the mailman over a bent mailbox flag, and she'd once spent an entire HOA meeting arguing that plastic flamingos were a visual assault on the community. If I pushed too hard, she'd dig in deeper, and we didn't have time for that. The hiss was getting louder, the smell of gas stronger, and I could feel the seconds ticking away like a countdown to disaster. I glanced around, hoping someone else was nearby, someone who could back me up or at least call for help. But the street was empty. Most of the neighbors were either at work or still inside, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding on the sidewalk. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't dare take my eyes off Karen long enough to dial. She was still hovering over the pipe, her shears poised like a guillotine, and I had no idea how much damage she'd already done. For all I knew, one more snip could be the one that sent us all skyward. "Karen, I'm begging you," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to stay composed. "This isn't about property values. This is about safety. That generator keeps people alive during storms. Mrs. Carter's kid, the one with the ventilator? She needs it. Mr. Reynolds with his oxygen tank? He needs it. If you cut that line, you're not just messing with a pipe, you're messing with their lives." For the first time, something flickered across her face, uncertainty, maybe, or the faintest hint of doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that infuriating smile. "Oh, don't bring the Carters into this," she said, her tone patronizing. "I'm sure they'd agree that a tidy neighborhood is worth a little inconvenience. Besides, if this generator is so important, why isn't it better protected? Why isn't there a sign?" "There is a sign," I snapped, pointing at the metal tag and the yellow tape, which were impossible to miss unless you were willfully blind. "It says emergency feed. Do not touch." "You're literally cutting through it." She glanced at the tag, then back at me, her expression unchanged. "That's not a proper sign," she said, as if I'd just suggested we paint the sidewalks pink. "It's barely legible. If they wanted people to leave it alone, they should have made it clearer." "I'm just doing what any responsible homeowner would do." Responsible? The word was so absurd in this context that I almost laughed, but the smell of gas was stronger now, a chemical tang that stung my nose and made my eyes water. I could feel the situation slipping out of control, like trying to hold onto a greased rope. Karen wasn't going to stop, not because she didn't understand, but because she didn't want to. To her, this was about winning, about proving she was right, about asserting her authority over a neighborhood she'd spent years trying to mold into her personal vision of perfection. And I was just the annoying neighbor trying to ruin her moment. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, and tried one last time. "Karen, I'm going to call the gas company right now," I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. "If you don't step away from that pipe, you're going to be responsible for whatever happens next. And trust me, you don't want that." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed, a glint of defiance flashing in them. "Go ahead and call," she said, her voice icy. "I'm not afraid of a little bureaucracy. I've been running this neighborhood's beautification efforts for years, and I know my rights." "Your rights?" I said, incredulous. "You're cutting a gas line, Karen. This isn't about your rights. This is about not blowing us all to kingdom come." She didn't respond, just turned back to the pipe, Her shears raised like she was about to deliver the final blow. That was it. I couldn't wait any longer. I dialed the gas company's emergency line, my fingers fumbling over the screen as I kept one eye on her. The operator picked up on the second ring, her voice calm but urgent. "Emergency services, how can I help you?" "There's a woman cutting a gas line in my neighborhood," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "It's the main feed for the backup generator. It's marked emergency feed, but she's cutting it anyway. There's already a leak. I can smell the gas." The operator's tone sharpened. "Sir, I need your address immediately. And get everyone away from the area now." I rattled off my address, my eyes locked on Karen, who was still standing there, oblivious to the gravity of what she'd done. "Karen, they're telling us to evacuate," I said, holding the phone up so she could hear. "You need to move. Now." She looked at me, then at the pipe, then back at me again. For a moment, I thought she might actually listen. But then she shrugged, a casual, careless gesture that made my blood run cold. "I'm almost done," she said, and raised the shears again. That's when I lost it. "Karen, get away from that pipe," I shouted, my voice echoing down the empty street. I lunged forward, not close enough to grab her, but close enough to make her pause. She stumbled backward, the shears slipping from her hands and clattering to the pavement. The hiss was deafening now, a high-pitched scream that seemed to vibrate in my bones. The smell of gas was overwhelming, a thick, suffocating cloud that made it hard to breathe. "What have you done?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and fury. I motioned for her to move back, away from the pipe, but she just stood there, her arms crossed, her face a mask of indignation. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's just a pipe. If it was dangerous, someone would have stopped me by now." I stared at her, my mind reeling. She didn't get it. She genuinely didn't understand what she'd done, or maybe she just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. The damage was done, and the clock was ticking. I could hear sirens in the distance, faint but growing louder, and I knew we didn't have much time. I grabbed my coffee mug from the railing, the liquid now cold and forgotten, and backed away from the pipe, keeping Karen in my line of sight. She was still standing there, watching me like I was the one who'd lost my mind, her floral blouse fluttering in the breeze as if nothing in the world was wrong. But everything was wrong. The gas line was breached, the generator was at risk, and the neighborhood, our neighborhood, with its elderly residents, its families, its kids, was now in danger. All because Karen had decided that a pipe didn't meet her aesthetic standards. All because she thought she knew better than everyone else. And as the sirens grew closer, I realized something. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a disaster in the making, and Karen had lit the fuse. The hiss from the gas line was no longer just a sound. It was a scream, a piercing wail that seemed to claw at the air itself. It was louder now, sharp and unrelenting, like a tea kettle left on the stove until it boiled dry. The smell of gas was inescapable, a thick, chemical haze that stung my nostrils and coated the back of my throat with a metallic tang. I stood frozen for a split second, my coffee mug still clutched in one hand, my phone in the other, the operator's voice still ringing in my ears. "Get everyone away from the area now." My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the chaos unfolding before me. Karen, oblivious to the catastrophe she'd unleashed, stood just a few feet away, her arms crossed, her floral blouse fluttering in the morning breeze like some absurd flag of defiance. She dropped her landscaping shears, thank God, but the damage was done. The gas line was breached, and the neighborhood, my neighborhood, was teetering on the edge of disaster. I forced myself to move, my sneakers scraping against the pavement as I backed away from the pipe. "Karen, move," I shouted, my voice raw with urgency. "You need to get back now." The sirens were closer, their wail cutting through the morning quiet, but they weren't here yet, and every second felt like an eternity. I could still see the gash in the pipe, a jagged tear in the metal where Karen's shears had bitten through. It wasn't just a dent anymore, it was a wound, and the gas was pouring out, invisible but deadly, spreading like a poison cloud across the sidewalk. Karen, of course, didn't budge. She tilted her head, her lips pursed in that infuriating way she had, like she was scolding a child for tracking mud into her pristine living room. "You're making a scene," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's just a little gas. If it was dangerous, there'd be a warning system or something. Honestly, you men always blow things out of proportion." I stared at her, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. A little gas? She'd just sliced open a high-pressure pipeline, the kind that could turn this entire block into a crater if something sparked. And she was standing there, acting like I was the one overreacting. I wanted to scream, to grab her by the shoulders and shake some sense into her, but there wasn't time. The smell was getting stronger, the hiss louder, and I could feel the weight of what was happening pressing down on me like a physical force. This wasn't just about Karen's arrogance anymore. This was about survival. "Karen, listen to me," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, though it trembled with barely contained rage. "That pipe feeds the emergency generator. It's not just some random utility line. It's what keeps this neighborhood running when the power goes out. People depend on it. Mrs. Carter's kid, the one with the ventilator? Mr. Reynolds with his oxygen tank? They need that generator. And you just cut the line that powers it. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her eyes flickered for a moment, a brief shadow of doubt crossing her face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She straightened her shoulders, her smile returning, sharper now, like a blade. "Oh, please," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "If it's so important, why isn't it buried? Why isn't it locked up? This is a residential neighborhood, not a construction site. I'm just doing what any responsible homeowner would do, taking care of an eyesore." I couldn't believe it. Even now, with the gas hissing around us, with the sirens screaming in the distance, she was doubling down. It wasn't just ignorance, it was delusion, a kind of self-righteous certainty that made her untouchable in her own mind. To Karen, this wasn't a gas line. It was a personal affront, a blemish on her vision of suburban perfection. And she was willing to risk everything, our homes, our safety, our lives, to prove she was right. I didn't have time to argue. I turned away from her, my phone still pressed to my ear, and spoke to the operator. "She's still here," I said, my voice tight. "She's not moving. The leak's getting worse. I can smell it everywhere." "Sir, you need to evacuate the area immediately," the operator said, her tone urgent but calm, the kind of calm that comes from dealing with disasters every day. "Get as far away from the pipe as you can and keep others away. We've got a crew on the way. They'll be there in 5 minutes. Do not go near the leak." 5 minutes. It didn't sound like long, but standing there, with the gas cloud growing thicker and Karen's smug face staring back at me, it felt like a lifetime. I shoved my phone into my pocket and took a step toward her, careful to stay upwind of the leak. "Karen, I'm not asking anymore," I said, my voice low and hard. "Move. Now, or I'll drag you away myself." Her eyes widened, just for a second, and I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to her. But then she scoffed, a sharp, derisive sound that made my blood boil. "Drag me," she said, her voice mocking. "Don't you dare touch me. I have every right to be here. This is my neighborhood, too." "Your neighborhood?" I snapped, my patience gone. "You just put the entire block in danger. You think your HOA handbook gives you the right to play demolition crew with a gas line? People could die, Karen. Do you get that?" She didn't answer, just turned her back to me, her arms still crossed, like she was done with the conversation. That's when I saw it, the first flicker of real fear in her posture, the way her shoulders tensed as the hiss grew louder, more insistent. She was starting to realize something was wrong, but her pride wouldn't let her admit it. Not yet. I didn't wait for her to come to her senses. I turned and sprinted toward my house, my coffee mug slipping from my hand and shattering on the pavement. I didn't care. I needed to warn the neighbors, to get people out of their homes before the gas spread any further. My house was closest, so I started there, banging on the front door of the Thompsons' place next door. "Mrs. Thompson," I shouted, pounding on the wood. "You need to get out. There's a gas leak." The door opened a crack, and Mrs. Thompson, a wiry woman in her late 60s with a penchant for knitting and gossip, peered out. "What's all this noise?" she said, her voice sharp. "I'm trying to watch my morning shows." "There's a gas leak," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "Karen cut the main gas line by the sidewalk. You need to get out of the house now." Her eyes widened, and for once, she didn't argue. She grabbed her purse and a sweater, muttering something about that woman as she shuffled out onto the porch. I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I moved to the next house, then the next, banging on doors, shouting warnings, my voice hoarse from the effort. Most people were confused but compliant, stepping out into the morning light with bewildered expressions. A few, like Mr. Reynolds, who relied on an oxygen tank, needed help, and I half carried him to the far side of the street, away from the leak. By the time I'd made it halfway down the block, the sirens were deafening, a chorus of wails that announced the arrival of the gas company's emergency crew. A white truck with flashing red lights screeched to a stop at the corner, and half a dozen workers in orange vests and hard hats spilled out, their faces grim. They moved with the kind of precision that comes from years of training, unrolling hoses and setting up barriers around the pipe. One of them, a burly guy with a clipboard, spotted me and jogged over. "You the one who called?" he asked, his voice clipped. "Yeah," I said, catching my breath. "It's that pipe over there." "The woman who cut it, she's still standing right next to it." He followed my gaze to where Karen was still stationed, her posture defiant, her hands now on her hips like she was supervising the crew's arrival. The worker's jaw tightened, and he muttered something under his breath that sounded a lot like idiot. He turned back to me. "Stay back," he said. "We've got this." I nodded, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene. The crew was shouting orders, their voices sharp and urgent, as they worked to cap the leak. One of them approached Karen, his arms raised in a clear signal to move, but she just shook her head, her lips moving in what I could only assume was another lecture about property values. The worker didn't have time for her nonsense. He grabbed her arm, not roughly but firmly, and pulled her away from the pipe. She yanked free, her face red with indignation, and started yelling something I couldn't hear over the sirens. I turned away, my stomach churning. The neighborhood was waking up now, people spilling out of their homes, some in pajamas, others clutching phones or pets. The street was a chaotic mix of confusion and fear, neighbors clustering together, their voices rising in a frantic hum. I caught snippets of conversation. What happened? Is it safe? Who did this? And I knew it wouldn't be long before the truth came out. Karen's name was already on people's lips, whispered with a mix of disbelief and anger. I made my way back to my porch, my legs shaky from adrenaline, and leaned against the railing, trying to process what had just happened. The gas company crew was still working, their movements precise but urgent, and I could see the faint outline of a containment barrier going up around the pipe. The sirens had quieted, replaced by the low rumble of a generator and the crackle of radios. It looked like they had the situation under control, at least for now, but the damage was done. The gas line was compromised, and with storm season looming, the timing couldn't have been worse. That's when I remembered the security cameras. My house had 4 of them installed after a string of package thefts last year. They were discreet, tucked under the eaves, and one of them had a perfect view of the sidewalk where Karen had been working. If I was lucky, it might have caught the whole thing, her bending over the pipe, her shears slicing through the metal, her smug smile as she dismissed my warnings. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through the footage. Sure enough, there it was, Karen, in all her floral-bloused glory, captured in crisp 1080p. Her shadow stretched across the pavement, her movements deliberate, almost theatrical, as she wrestled with the pipe and snipped through it like she was cutting the ribbon at a grand opening. The timestamp showed it had happened just minutes ago, and the audio, faint but clear, picked up her voice. This ugly pipe was lowering the property value. You're welcome. I saved the footage to my phone, then copied it to a USB drive for good measure. This wasn't just evidence, it was a weapon, proof of Karen's recklessness, her arrogance, her complete disregard for the people around her. I knew I'd need it, because this wasn't going to end with the gas company capping the leak. This was bigger, messier, and Karen had no idea what she'd just stepped into. The storm clouds were rolling in now, thick and gray, piling up on the eastern horizon like a warning. The air felt heavy, charged with the promise of rain, and I could hear the first faint rumbles of thunder in the distance. It was fitting, in a way, the weather mirroring the chaos Karen had unleashed. I glanced across the street, where porch lights were starting to flicker, a sign that the power grid was already straining. The backup generator, the one that was supposed to kick in during outages, was silent, its fuel supply cut off by Karen's shears. I felt a pang of dread, not just for myself, but for the neighbors who relied on that generator, the Carters, the Reynolds, the dozens of others who'd be left vulnerable if the power went out. I pulled out my phone again and opened the neighborhood group chat, a chaotic mess of texts and emojis that served as our unofficial communication hub. It was already buzzing, people posting about the sirens, the gas company truck, the smell in the air. What's going on? Someone typed. Is it safe to stay inside? Another asked. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. How do you even begin to explain something like this? How do you tell a group of people that their safety, their homes, their lives were jeopardized because one woman decided a pipe didn't match her aesthetic vision? I typed, then deleted, then typed again, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Finally, I settled on the truth, short and brutal. Karen cut the main gas line this morning. I saw it happen. It's the one that feeds the backup generator. I hit send and waited. The chat exploded almost instantly, a flurry of replies popping up like fireworks. What? Are you serious? This can't be real. I scrolled through the messages, my heart sinking as the reality of the situation hit home. Linda, who lived next to the generator node and had a son with a rare neurological condition, responded with a single, chilling line. If my son gets sick tonight, I will personally sue her into the Stone Age. I didn't blame her. Linda's son, Ethan, was 8 years old and relied on refrigerated medication to prevent seizures. Without power, without the generator, that medication would spoil and Ethan could end up in the hospital or worse. The thought made my stomach twist, a sickening mix of fear and fury. Karen hadn't just made a mistake, she'd put people's lives at risk, and she was still standing there, arguing with the gas company crew like she was the victim. The first raindrops fell, heavy and cold, splattering against the pavement like tears. The power across the street blinked twice, then went out, the porch lights fading one by one like dying stars. I watched, helpless, as the neighborhood plunged into darkness, the silence broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the steady hiss of the gas line, now muffled but still there, a reminder of what Karen had done. The homes on our shared emergency grid, the ones that relied on the generator, were vulnerable now, their occupants left to face the storm without the safety net we'd worked so hard to build. I stepped back onto my porch, the rain soaking through my shirt, and looked out at the chaos. The gas company crew was still working, their orange vests glowing in the dim light, but Karen was nowhere to be seen. She'd finally retreated, probably to her house, where she could hide behind her curtains and pretend none of this was her fault. But it was her fault, all of it. And as the storm rolled in, angry and unforgiving, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen had lit the fuse, and the explosion was coming, whether she liked it or not. The rain was coming down in sheets now, a relentless curtain of water that turned the street into a shimmering mirror of chaos. The gas company crew was still out there, their orange vests slick with rain, their faces set in grim determination as they worked to contain the leak Karen had caused. The sirens had faded, but the tension in the air was thicker than ever, a palpable weight that pressed down on the neighborhood like the storm clouds overhead. I stood on my porch, soaked to the bone, my phone clutched in one hand, the security footage of Karen's reckless act burning a hole in my pocket. The neighborhood was awake now, alive with whispers and accusations, and Karen's name was on everyone's lips, a curse muttered in doorways and group chats. She'd crossed a line, a literal gas line, and the fallout was just beginning. I'd barely had time to catch my breath when the power flickered again, the streetlights buzzing before going dark. The backup generator, our lifeline, was silent, its fuel supply severed by Karen's landscaping shears. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We were vulnerable, exposed, and the storm was only getting worse. Thunder rumbled all a low, menacing growl that seemed to mock us, and I could see neighbors peering out from behind curtains, their faces pale with worry. The group chat was a frenzy now, messages piling up faster than I could read them. The generator's not working. My dad's oxygen tank is low. What's happening? Is this because of the gas line? And then, Linda's message, the one that cut through the noise like a knife. If my son gets sick tonight, I will personally sue her into the Stone Age. I couldn't blame her. Linda's son, Ethan, was a fragile kid, his life tethered to refrigerated medication and a steady power supply. Without the generator, without the grid, he was at risk, and so were others. Mr. Reynolds with his oxygen, Mrs. Carter's daughter with her ventilator, the elderly couple down the street who relied on electric heat. Karen hadn't just cut a pipe, she'd cut the thread that held our community together, and now we were unraveling, one flickering light at a time. I slipped inside, the warmth of my house a stark contrast to the cold dread in my chest, and pulled up the security footage again. There she was, Karen, in her floral blouse, bending over the pipe with the confidence of a surgeon, her shears slicing through the metal like it was nothing. The timestamp, the audio, the unmistakable smugness in her voice, it was all there, undeniable proof of her arrogance, her recklessness, her complete disregard for the lives she'd endangered. I saved the file to 3 different drives, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and resolve. This wasn't just about the gas line anymore. This was about justice, about holding Karen accountable for the chaos she'd unleashed. By mid-morning, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the storm's aftermath was everywhere. Fallen branches littering lawns, trash bins tipped over, puddles reflecting a gray, unforgiving sky. The gas company had capped the leak, but the damage to the generator system was done. The pressure had dropped to 0, and without a steady gas supply, the backup grid was useless. I could see the crew packing up now, their faces weary but professional, and I knew they'd done all they could. But it wasn't enough. Not with the power out, not with the neighborhood teetering on the edge of crisis. That's when the HOA president, Mr. Jeffries, called an emergency meeting. I wasn't surprised. Jeff was a mild-mannered guy, a retired accountant who preferred spreadsheets to confrontation, but even he couldn't ignore this. The meeting was set for noon at the clubhouse, a low brick building at the center of the neighborhood that still had power, thanks to a separate generator unaffected by Karen's sabotage. I grabbed my laptop and the USB drive with the footage, my stomach churning with a mix of nerves and determination. This wasn't just about informing the neighbors, it was about showing them the truth, about making sure Karen couldn't wiggle out of this one with her usual excuses. The clubhouse was packed when I arrived, every chair filled, people standing along the walls, their faces a mix of exhaustion and fury. The air was thick with the smell of wet clothes and coffee, the latter courtesy of a Keurig someone had set up in the corner. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months were there, Mrs. Thompson with her knitting bag, Mr. Reynolds with his portable oxygen tank, Linda with her arms crossed and a look that could have melted steel. The room buzzed with low, Angry murmurs, the kind of sound that precedes a reckoning. Jeff stood at the front, his clipboard clutched like a shield, trying to maintain order as people shouted questions and accusations. "Let's settle down, please," Jeff said, his voice strained. "We're here to discuss the, unexpected technical difficulties with the generator system." "Technical difficulties?" Someone shouted from the back, their voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's what you're calling it? We all know what happened. Karen cut the gas line." The room erupted, a chorus of agreement and outrage. Jeff raised his hands, his face flushed, but the crowd wasn't having it. "Cut the crap, Jeff," another voice called. "We want answers." I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my laptop under my arm. "I have answers," I said, loud enough to cut through the noise. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me, a mix of curiosity and expectation. I set up my laptop on the projector table, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I have footage of what happened this morning," I said. "You need to see it." The silence was deafening as I plugged in the USB drive and pulled up the video. The projector hummed to life, casting a grainy image onto the wall, a clear shot of the sidewalk, the gas line, and Karen. There she was, her floral blouse unmistakable, her shadow stretching across the pavement as she bent over the pipe. The shears glinted in her hands, and the snip, loud, final, deliberate, echoed through the room like a gunshot. The hiss followed, a sinister soundtrack to her crime, and then her voice, clear and smug. This ugly pipe was lowering the property value. "You're welcome." No one spoke. The room was frozen, every pair of eyes glued to the screen, every breath held. Even Karen, who'd waltzed in just minutes earlier with her reusable coffee mug and that infuriating smile, went still, her face pale as she stared at her own image. For a split second, I thought I saw fear in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of defiance. When the video ended, the room exploded. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of rage. "She could have killed us," someone yelled. "My basement's flooded because the sump pump failed," another cried. My mom's stairlift stopped halfway up. She had to sleep on the stairs. The accusations piled up, each one a brick in the wall of Karen's guilt, and I could see Jeff struggling to regain control, his clipboard trembling in his hands. Karen stood slowly, placing her coffee mug on the floor with exaggerated care, and raised her hand, like she was in a school assembly. "Let me speak," she said, her voice calm but syrupy, the kind of tone you'd use to soothe a tantruming toddler. The room quieted, not out of respect, but out of sheer disbelief. She had the audacity to speak after all this? "I didn't know that pipe was important," she began, her words measured, rehearsed. "No one told me. I thought it was for someone's personal grill or something. Honestly, it looked awful, and it didn't meet the aesthetic standards I've been enforcing for years. I was acting in the best interests of the neighborhood." The room went ice cold. A man in the front row barked out a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Enforcing?" he said. "You're not the HOA dictator, Karen. You don't get to decide what stays and what goes." Karen flushed, but she pressed on, undeterred. "I think the real issue here is the lack of proper labeling and communication," she said, her voice rising. "If this infrastructure was so critical, why wasn't it underground? Why wasn't it protected? I acted with the best intentions, and I won't be vilified for trying to improve our community." "Best intentions?" Linda snapped, standing so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "You endangered my son's life. His medication spoiled because the power went out, and now he's at risk of a seizure. You think your best intentions mean anything to me?" The room erupted again, voices piling on, each one sharper than the last. "You cut a marked gas line. People could have died, Karen. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about safety." Jeff tried to intervene, his voice drowned out by the chaos, but it was no use. The neighborhood had had enough of Karen's excuses, her deflections, her smug certainty that she was above reproach. I stepped forward again, my voice cutting through the noise. "I designed part of the generator grid 2 years ago," I said, my tone steady but firm. "That pipe wasn't just some random utility line. It was a designated emergency supply, approved by the City Planning Commission. It was marked, it was documented, and it was critical. This wasn't an eyesore, Karen. This was a lifeline." The room quieted, my words sinking in. Karen's face twitched, her smugness cracking just enough for me to see the panic beneath. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jeff finally took the floor, his face pale but resolute. "Regardless of intentions," he said, his voice shaking, "the gas line was city-approved and clearly labeled. Tampering with utility infrastructure is a criminal offense. We've already been contacted by the city's public safety office, and they'll be conducting a full investigation." Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear. Not regret, not remorse, just fear of consequences. She tried to speak, but the room wasn't hers anymore. Linda stood again, her voice trembling with rage. "I'm not waiting for the city," she said. "I'm filing a civil complaint. My lawyer says the footage alone is enough for reckless endangerment. And I know I'm not the only one." She wasn't. A chorus of voices echoed her, neighbors stepping forward with their own grievances, medical costs, property damage, emotional distress. It wasn't just about the gas line anymore. It was about trust, about safety, about the realization that one person's arrogance could hold an entire community hostage. Karen, sensing the tide turning, began gathering her things, her movements jerky, her coffee mug forgotten on the floor. She tried to slip out quietly, but the neighbors weren't done. A group followed her outside, their voices sharp, their questions relentless. Someone pulled out a phone and started filming, narrating as they went. "This is the woman who cut our gas line and shut down our generator during a storm. Say hi, Karen." The video would later spread like wildfire, shared across neighborhood threads and local Facebook groups, a viral testament to Karen's downfall. But that was just the beginning. The investigation that followed was like peeling back the layers of an onion, each one revealing a new level of Karen's recklessness, her entitlement, her utter disregard for the community she claimed to serve. By evening, city workers arrived to inspect the pipeline, their faces grim as they traced the damage. I recognized one of the engineers, a guy named Tom who'd worked with me on the generator project 2 years ago. He pulled me aside, his voice low. "This is worse than we thought," he said. "That pipe wasn't just feeding your generator. It was part of a critical loop tied to a nearby school's auxiliary systems. If the leak had gone undetected, it could have taken out an entire emergency zone." I felt sick. Karen hadn't just endangered our neighborhood. She'd jeopardized a school, a place where kids, teachers, and staff relied on backup systems during crises. Her obsession with beautification had ripple effects far beyond our block, and the city wasn't taking it lightly. The words federal code violation started floating around, and suddenly, this wasn't just an HOA issue, it was a legal nightmare. The next day, things got even stranger. A contractor named Will, who'd done landscaping for Karen the previous spring, came forward with a story that sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. He claimed Karen had asked him to relocate a utility box behind her house because it clashed with her hedge line. When he refused, explaining that it was tied to the community's lighting grid, she fired him on the spot and muttered something about doing it herself if no one else had the spine. Will's statement prompted the city to dig deeper, and what they found was a Pandora's box of violations. Utility reps showed up with clipboards and blueprints, tracing the pipeline along the sidewalk that bordered Karen's property, the same sidewalk she'd always complained was too industrial. I was asked to assist, given my familiarity with the generator install, and what we uncovered was chilling. Not only had Karen cut the main gas line, but she'd also tampered with a secondary junction box that housed sensors for automated leak detection. The tampering was subtle, an access panel unscrewed and loosely reattached, but when tested, the sensors failed to respond. If I hadn't called the gas company when I did, we could have gone hours without an alarm, the gas spreading undetected until it was too late. The lead inspector, a no-nonsense woman named Maria, jotted something on her clipboard and muttered, "This isn't ignorance. This is sabotage." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Karen wasn't just a busybody with a pair of shears, she was a liability, a walking disaster who'd been playing fast and loose with the neighborhood's safety for years. But the real bombshell came later that afternoon, when one of the engineers tripped over a partially buried cable behind Karen's house. He brushed away the dirt and found something that made everyone stop in their tracks, a dusty old maintenance van, hidden behind overgrown bushes, its license plate missing, its windshield cracked. The back doors were locked, but through the grimy windows, we could see it was stuffed to the brim with what looked like city property, traffic cones, meter readers, missing utility signs, even a broken solar-powered speed detector that had vanished from the school zone last summer. When they pried open the doors, the truth spilled out, rows of confiscated neighborhood items, from a wooden park bench to children at play signs Karen had claimed were blown away. There were even LED light fixtures, still in their packaging, clearly stolen from a municipal shipment. The neighborhood was stunned. People gathered on porches and lawns, whispering theories, half joking about starting a documentary. Someone posted a meme with Karen's face photoshopped over a Bond villain, captioned "License to Snip." It went viral in the local Facebook group, but the reality was far from funny. The city launched an official investigation, utility reps seizing the van and confirming that multiple serial numbers matched stolen municipal assets. Karen, whether she realized it or not, was in deep trouble, felony-level trouble. By the weekend, the HO convened another meeting, this one less a discussion and more a tribunal. The board had received enough complaints and legal documentation to formally motion for Karen's removal from all HOA duties. The vote required a 2/3 majority, but it wasn't even close. Every homeowner, save for one lone ally who admitted he just liked her cookies, voted to oust her. Karen showed up late, clearly unprepared for the tide that had turned against her. When she heard the result, her face went pale, then red, then that strange Karen shade of defensive denial. She tried to argue, claiming the vote was invalid, that her years of service meant something, that beautification was her calling. But no one was buying it. Jeff, who'd stayed neutral for far too long, handed her a certified letter stating she was under HOA suspension pending municipal and legal outcomes. Karen stormed out, her purse swinging violently, knocking over a potted plant someone had donated to the clubhouse. It shattered, and no one moved to clean it up. It was symbolic, the plant, like Karen's authority, was wreckage now. The aftermath was bittersweet. Repairs to the generator system began, with steel guards installed around the pipeline, but the sense of betrayal lingered. Karen had been a fixture in the neighborhood, a self-appointed queen who'd ruled with an iron grip and a color chart. And now she was a pariah, her legacy reduced to a viral video and a var full of stolen goods. For me, it was personal, not just because I'd caught her, but because I'd poured hours into building that emergency system, only to see it nearly undone by someone who valued appearances over lives. But as the investigation deepened and the neighborhood rallied, I knew one thing for certain. Karen's reign was over, and we were just getting started. The storm had passed, but its scars lingered. The neighborhood woke to a soggy aftermath, fallen branches strewn across lawns, trash bins flipped like discarded toys, and puddles mirroring a sky still bruised with clouds. The power was still out in patches, the backup generator silent, its lifelines severed by Karen's reckless snip. But the air felt different now, charged with something new, resolve. The chaos she'd unleashed had shaken us, but it had also woken us up. Karen's reign of aesthetic tyranny was over, and in its place, something stronger was taking root, a community ready to rebuild, not just its infrastructure, but its spirit. The fallout from her actions was far from over, but as the sun broke through the clouds, casting a tentative glow over Elmwood Drive. I felt a flicker of hope. We'd survived Karen. Now we could thrive. The days that followed were a whirlwind, a strange blend of courtroom drama and suburban gossip run amok. Karen, once the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, had vanished into her house like a ghost, her blinds drawn tight, her porch lights, those blinding LEDs she'd insisted on for security, switched off. Her car sat untouched in the driveway, and her usual 6 a.m. jog, complete with pastel workout gear and a judgmental glare, was nowhere to be seen. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors. She was hiding, she was lawyering up, she was planning to flee. But no one had seen her, and for the first time in years, the sidewalks felt free of her scrutiny. The city, meanwhile, was moving fast. Inspectors returned, their trucks parked ominously in front of Karen's house not once but twice. The investigation had ballooned beyond the gas line, thanks to the discovery of that van behind her property, stuffed with stolen municipal goods. It wasn't just about our generator anymore, it was about a broader betrayal. The pipe she'd cut was part of a critical loop feeding a nearby school and an emergency shelter, infrastructure designed to protect the most vulnerable during crises. Tampering with it wasn't just reckless, it was, as one official put it, a violation of federal safety codes. The phrase sent a chill through the neighborhood. Karen wasn't just a nuisance now, she was a liability, and the consequences were piling up like storm debris. Her attempt to control the narrative was as predictable as it was doomed. A day after the HOA meeting, she sent a 6-paragraph email to the entire community, a manifesto dripping with self-justification. She claimed she'd been targeted and misrepresented, that her actions were based on visual assessments of unmarked hazards. She even had the gall to argue she had every right to perform basic beautification on shared property. But the footage of her snipping the pipe, her smug, "You're welcome," echoing in everyone's minds, was too damning. The email was met with a tsunami of replies, angry corrections, screenshots of the video, and a few choice memes that had already started circulating. The HOA server, overwhelmed, disabled the reply all function, but the damage was done. Karen's words were a paper shield against a tidal wave of truth. The investigation took a surreal turn when the city uncovered more evidence of her meddling. Utility workers, combing through the pipeline's layout, found additional tampering, loose bolts on a valve cover, a sensor wire clipped just enough to disable it. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate, subtle enough to avoid immediate detection, but dangerous enough to cripple the system over time. The lead inspector, Maria, didn't mince words. This is sabotage, plain and simple. The word hung heavy, transforming Karen from a meddling neighbor into something far more sinister. And then there was the van, a Pandora's box of stolen goods that painted a picture of a woman who'd been hoarding control for years. Park benches, street signs, even a speed detector meant to protect schoolchildren. How she'd managed to amass it all without being caught was a mystery, but one thing was clear. Karen's obsession with appearances had a darker edge, a need to dominate that went beyond hedge heights and paint colors. The neighborhood, bruised but unbowed, began to heal. The gas company pledged to fortify the pipeline, installing steel guards and motion-activated cameras with a pointed sign, "Smile for safety." The message wasn't subtle, and neither was the community's response. The HOA, under new leadership, seized the moment to overhaul its rulebook. Carla Watkins, a retired fire chief with a no-nonsense demeanor and a laugh that could rattle windows, took over as president. Unlike Karen, Carla cared about resilience over aesthetics, safety over symmetry. Her first act was forming an emergency response committee, something Karen had always dismissed because storms make the shrubs messy. Now we had a communication network, backup medical supplies stored at the clubhouse, and CPR training scheduled quarterly. It was progress, real progress, born from the ashes of Karen's chaos. The community's spirit shifted, too. Freed from Karen's nitpicking, neighbors started to express themselves. Porch swings appeared, fairy lights twinkled in backyards, and someone even painted a mailbox to look like a goose, something Karen would have reported as a visual assault. The atmosphere softened, the cold glances over hedges replaced by waves and smiles. We'd been through a hurricane, not just of weather but of betrayal, and we were stepping into the light together. The turning point came with the block party, dubbed Neighborhood Recovery Month, by a vote at the clubhouse. It wasn't an official holiday, but it felt like one. Banners went up, food trucks lined the street, and kids ran wild with glow sticks and cotton candy. The clubhouse lawn became an outdoor theater, a projector powered by the newly repaired generator screening a family-friendly movie. That generator, once called a noisy monstrosity by Karen, hummed proudly behind its steel cage, its top crowned with a polished plaque from the fire department, in honor of those who value safety over appearances. This generator saved lives. Don't cut corners. Passers-by paused to read it, some smiling, others nodding. It was a monument to our survival, a middle finger to Karen's legacy. The party wasn't just a celebration, it was a reclamation. We strung lights between the oak trees, their glow pushing back the dark, and shared stories of the storm, the outage, the moment we realized Karen had gone too far. Joe, an older resident with a penchant for storytelling, held court near the generator, regaling newcomers with the tale of the lady with the gardening shears who wanted a prettier sidewalk. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper as he described the snip, the hiss, the near disaster, and the newcomers gasped, then laughed, one shaking their head and saying, "You're kidding, right?" Joe just grinned and tapped his nose, letting the legend grow. Karen's name became a verb, a warning. Don't go full Karen, people said when someone got too pushy about minor rules. The utility company used our neighborhood as a case study in training modules, featured in a newsletter titled, "How to Protect Community Infrastructure from Itself." There was even talk of a PBS segment on grassroots recovery after civic sabotage. Karen had always wanted our community to be famous for its landscaping. Instead, it was immortalized for surviving her. A week after the party, I was watering my plants when I saw it, a moving truck parked in front of Karen's house. Her home, silent for weeks, was being emptied, furniture, boxes, even a broken garden gnome she'd once confiscated from a neighbor. No one had seen her since she'd driven off, scarf-wrapped and flanked by paralegals, and rumors swirled about her fate. She'd been charged with multiple counts of tampering with public property, with fines and possible jail time looming. Some said she'd left the state. Others claimed she was holed up in a condo downtown, plotting her comeback. But most of us didn't care. She was gone, and that was enough. Then came an unexpected gift. Carla knocked on my door one Saturday, holding a box with my name scrawled on it. "Found this in the HOA storage shed," she said, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Figured you should open it." Inside was a treasure trove, blueprints, emails, HOA minutes spanning 5 years, and a folder labeled Neighborhood Improvement Proposals Rejected. It was a catalog of ideas Karen had vetoed, a community garden, a little free library, a walking trail extension, all shut down because they didn't fit her vision. Carla asked if I'd lead a new committee to revive them, and I said yes without hesitation. It felt like closing a circle. The guy who caught Karen snipping the gas line was now helping build something better. The final touch came that same day, a small but perfect act of defiance. A resident, a quiet artist named Sarah, crafted a wooden sign and mounted it on the generator's steel cage. It read, simply, "This line survived Karen." People stopped to take pictures, some laughing, others nodding in quiet agreement. It wasn't just about the pipe, it was about us, about what we'd endured and overcome. The sign became a landmark, a selfie spot, a reminder that we'd faced the storm and come out stronger. By summer, the neighborhood had transformed. The sun didn't just rise, it warmed us, lit us up, gave us color. Lawns sprouted birdhouses and tire swings. Porches gained wind chimes that sang in the breeze. The community center got a new mural, painted by local teens and artists, depicting a cartoon generator with a cape, fending off a pair of scissors labeled Petty Authority. At its base, a line summed up our lesson: power comes from community, not control. The fire department returned one last time, not for an emergency, but for a gesture of gratitude. They unveiled a second plaque on the generator, this one signed by the chief, to the residents of Elmwood Drive, who chose safety over vanity. Keep the lines strong. It was dated the day of Karen's fateful snip, a permanent marker of our resilience. As for me, I found peace in the small moments, walking past the generator, hearing its steady hum, seeing Sarah's sign and smiling at its truth. Karen had been a force of chaos, a lesson in what happens when someone mistakes domination for care, when they prioritize vision over reality. She'd ruled with scissors and smugness, but in her downfall, she gave us something she never intended: unity. We didn't just rebuild the pipeline, we rebuilt trust, laughter, a neighborhood that finally remembered what it meant to stand together. Every now and then, I think back to that morning, the hiss of the gas, the absurdity of Karen's floral blouse against the backdrop of disaster. It was a moment that could have broken us, but instead, it forged us. We learned that true power isn't in control, it's in connection, in the hands that lift each other up when the lights go out. And as I walk past that generator, its hum a quiet anthem of survival, I know one thing for certain: no storm, no scissors, no single act of arrogance can cut the ties that bind us now. We're stronger than that, and we'll keep the lines, literal and figurative, running strong, together, for good.